Welcome to Bad Ideas, this show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's episode is brought to you by our featured patron, Stony8787.
Thank you, Stony.
Tony's got the bad idea for us for this week. Tony, what are we learning about today?
Today we're going to be talking about Heaven's Gate, which I started researching before I realized that the episode suggestion was for Heaven's Gate the movie, which is a Western, and not Heaven's Gate the cult, and then I decided to do this anyway because that movie's 4 hours long and I didn't have time this week.
Okay. Okay.
So we will get to Heaven's Gate the movie, the one that buried the United Artists Studios and all this and its incompetence, but for now we are going to talk about the Heaven's Gate cult.
It would have been a great week to coordinate and you cover the cult and I would cover the movie and then everybody would be thoroughly confused.
Yes, very much so, but I think the next one I'm going to cover is going to be the Heaven's Gate movie, so we get back-to-back Heaven's Gates, from me anyway.
Yeah, that'll be even more confusing.
Anyway, the Heaven's Gate cult was a millenarian religious group that believed that the Earth was going to be recycled, spaded under, and refurbished for higher evolved beings. They also believed that toward the end, the only way to become the higher being was through leaving your so-called vehicle, which is your body. Once again, we are diving deeper into a death cult that culminated in almost every member ending their own lives, not with Flavor Aid this time, but applesauce, barbiturates, and vodka.
Oh boy. You really love these things. You didn't even have to talk about people who killed themselves to sacrifice their bodies to the aliens or something. But you did anyway.
The cults are one of my favorite topics. Like, it's just so strange. And like this one is a little bit different in a lot of ways, so I've decided to just dive deep on this one.
Okay.
It all starts with Marshall Applewhite. He was a Texan who became a music teacher and started a family and led a mostly normal life. He was married with 2 children and graduated from the University of Colorado with a master's in musical theater. On the outside, he led a mostly normal life, but he was concealing the fact that he was a homosexual. After a few bouts with depression and his father dying, some extramarital affairs, and some near scandals that may have involved students of his, he resigned his position. During a hospital stay for what I believe was heart issues, they were a little bit unclear about that, he met a woman who would help him found the Heaven's Gate cult. Her name was Bonnie Nettles. The two hit it off extremely well, and she filled this void where he really, really wanted to have a relationship with a woman that was completely intimate except for the sexual side of things, so he found his platonic life partner in her, and she kind of enabled this grandiose strangeness that he had. They hit it off mostly talking about theology and a little bit about aliens, and it just went from there.
Theology and aliens go together really well.
Yeah, definitely.
It's always fun looking in the Bible. It's like, where's them aliens at? Is it the sons of God? Oh, but it's the sons of God. Ooh, what about the Nephilim? Ooh, maybe it's the Nephilim.
It's always the
fallen
Nephilim.
Angels? Demons?
Yeah.
How does it all connect? They're all on UFOs together with the Bigfoots.
Unfortunately for Nettles, she was also already involved, had a family and children, and decided that she was going to just go ahead and divorce her husband and abandon her children to be with Applewhite.
Wow. Must have been some really good alien conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some good alien conversations, but it's never been like, I'm going to abandon everyone I know and just join up with this person.
Really? Both of these people seem, from your description of them, relatively normal. Like,
yeah.
Lots of people are interested in aliens. Lots of people believe in God in some capacity or another.
Yeah, the majority of the Earth does.
They've got some kind of issues maybe, but then all of a sudden they meet each other and their life is so impacted each by the other that everything is completely derailed.
Yeah, and that always seems to be a thing with cult leaders, is they have this weird like buzzing energy that just attracts people that are a little bit like in pain, a little bit out of it to them. So I'm not exactly sure what that sort of charisma is, but anytime I study cults, it seems like these main people have it. The two had very deep beliefs in Christianity, but also explored the ideas of extraterrestrials, astrology, and a lot of other New Age beliefs. They believed that they were soulmates and had met in past lives. More than this, she encouraged his deepening delusions to the point that he believed that they were simultaneously the two witnesses mentioned in Revelations, while also being the reincarnation of Jesus Christ.
Man, that's just some, like, theological spaghetti thrown at the wall and waiting to see what sticks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are all definitely things that exist. Or, I mean, you know, like, within theology.
Yeah, it's just like it's like if you were to just put a bunch of different random tropes into a generator and you had to pick 3 at once, and that's what popped up. The couple would attempt to open some bookstores and tried to start a group called The No Place, where they would teach others about their beliefs. After these failed in 1973, the couple went on the road to teach as many people as they could. They lived in complete poverty and often skipped out on hotels without paying.
Oh, I thought you were, I was gonna be like, hey, these guys are living like an, what is the word, ascetic, or like, you're intentionally poor, but now
yeah, like a monastic life.
Right.
I guess not all
they're
monks
just
live
being
poor.
jerks and not paying for stuff that they're using, and I'm less on board.
While on the road, they started to clarify their beliefs, creating a strange amalgam of Christian doctrine and psychology, the works of science fiction authors like Heinlein and Clarke. They tried speaking at churches, and they were known as the Two, or the UFO Two, but these ideas really weren't all that well received.
I'm trying to imagine the kind of church that would have these people as the UFO Two.
My guess is it was mostly kind of the New Age churches where they were like heavily on like personal growth and all this stuff and a little bit less on like gospel. It was kind of a trend in the 70s. And even those people weren't buying it. In 1974, their habit of not paying bills caught up with them, and Applewhite was jailed for 6 months for not returning a rental car that he said was divinely given to him. This time in jail allowed him to ponder his next moves. He had decided to focus mostly on aliens and being part of the next evolution of humanity, while also believing that he would be in contact with those very same aliens soon. They initially named their organization the Anonymous Sexaholic Celibate Church, but it soon became known as the Human Individual Metamorphosis.
Good, because the first one isn't great on the brochure.
Yeah. No, that one doesn't look good on the brochure, and a lot of people, like, that's just not their bag. Their belief system now fell under what was known as the ancient astronaut theory. This is the idea that intelligent extraterrestrial beings visited Earth and made contact with humans in antiquity and prehistoric times. Proponents suggested that the contact influenced the development of modern cultures, technologies, and religions, and even human biology. A common position is that deities, for most, if not all religions, are extraterrestrial in origin, and that advanced technologies brought to Earth by ancient astronauts were interpreted as evidence of divine status to early humans. So, like, the show Ancient Aliens always dives deep into this. That's pretty much the entire premise of it, if you've ever heard of that or seen that show with Giorgio Tsoukalos, the crazy-haired alien dude.
Yeah, it also cropped up in our Sun Classic Pictures episode, where they got really deep into the Ancient Aliens kind of propaganda.
And also in, like, Prometheus and a bunch of other movies. It's kind of a big popular thing right now.
But yeah, it's all over the place.
This is when the religions started to get real followers. Having a bit more of a solidified outline of their beliefs, they were able to travel through California and gained their first 50 people. At a particularly effective talk in Oregon, they convinced about 20 people at once to abandon their lives and join them for road missionary work. So they actually got 20 people in one go to completely abandon everything, get rid of all their possessions, and just join them on the road.
I've always wondered about that kind of a decision, to just walk away from literally everything. That it shows up in the Bible, which, I would assume these guys would sort of point to, where Jesus walks up to a guy who's a fisherman, and he's like, he shows him a miracle, so it's not completely, stupid that he would say, okay, now you do something for me, but then he's like, all right, you're done being a fisherman, come walk around with me. We don't have a business plan. I don't know how we're going to eat. Let's just go. And it's weird in the Bible, and it's even weirder to hear about it in real, modern day times where you have a reference point for what that would be like.
Yeah, and you've probably seen a fair amount from other religions and everything. It's like a random fisherman on the road is probably a lot less learned than these people were. He would often convince these people that they were like a caterpillar and that his church would allow them to enter a cocoon to eventually emerge as changed beings. He often refused to use the term religion because he thought that science was superior to religion, but at the same time he implored them to have faith in him and faith that the aliens would come, and he kind of straddled this weird line between New Age self-empowerment, old school religion, and, oddly enough, some things from Star Trek. It was just a very weird line that he walked, that he was able to get young people, former Scientologists, and occult-based people into this church.
This is reminding me a little bit of, a less cynical version of L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, I kept getting that feeling while I was watching this. Like, it seemed like Applewhite was just a little bit of a nicer dude, although I wish that he would blink in his videos because it's really unsettling when you watch him.
Oh, I didn't realize there was video of this guy.
There's tons of video of this guy. Like, you can go watch it, like, at any time. You can see the recruitment videos. You can see, like, some of his last videos. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there with Applewhite. By 1975, Applewhite and Nettles had taken the names Bo and Peep, and they had about 70 followers, and saw themselves as shepherds tending to a flock. Applewhite believed that complete separation from earthly desires were prerequisites of ascension, and emphasized passages in the New Testament in which Jesus spoke about forsaking worldly attachments. Members were consequently instructed to renounce friends, family, media, drugs, alcohol, jewelry, facial hair, and sexuality. Furthermore, they were required to adopt biblical names. And this isn't like biblical names. These were names that he gave to them that were sort of like sci-fi sounding names.
Oh, okay. So biblical in heavy air quotes names.
Yeah, biblical in theirs. Like, they were thinking about like how like Christ would rename apostles and so on. Like, I believe Simon became Peter and things like that.
I think it's just the fact that he had a first and a second name.
Could be. I'm not entirely sure. You're the authority on
I
that.
will fill this gap in. Abraham gets renamed. He starts out as Abram. He gets renamed to Abraham. Jacob gets renamed to Israel, and Paul gets renamed to Saul. Those are the big milestone ones. I may be missing some.
But they decided that they were going to adopt 2-syllable names that ended in Odi, and 3 consonants, and then the first syllable. So it was Rakoti, and Jamodi, and Levodi, and names like that for all of their followers. Applewhite stated that these names emphasized to his followers that they were spiritual children. As they went deeper into a nomadic lifestyle, so too did their demands on their flock. They were kept isolated. Oftentimes, they were paired into couples for a few weeks at a time so they could get these people to tolerate each other even if they didn't like each other. They would just be forced into this like platonic couple where they had to get over their quirks and learn their personalities and learn how to function with them. And then every few weeks they would cycle in with another person just to make sure that these couples kept on moving forward.
How much of this do you think, based on what you've read, is intentional, emotional, psychological manipulation, and how much is it them just kind of coming up with it piecemeal?
It seems to be about 50-50 for a lot of this stuff because they were intensely paranoid about losing members, but they were also intensely paranoid about getting too big. So they wanted to have as much control over the limited numbers that they had. And there's a lot of evidence that points to the fact that he might have had a form of schizophrenia, that he might have had like a lot of actual delusions. So there was sincerity in a lot of this, but I think that there was also very strong manipulation happening, and it was mostly just power moves. I don't know. I go back and forth on this, and that's one of the things that you see about effective cult leaders is they blur the lines between the two.
And even other people who will pull tactics like this, I always wonder how conscious it is, right? Like, say, an abusive boyfriend or something that pulls somebody away from their contacts with their family and with their friends. Is it them saying, I must have this person under my control, and this is the best way to do it? Or is it some nascent form of... is it some nascent form of insecurity that drives them to say, no, you must be all for me, and that just feeds into the rest of their whole deal?
I think that that's a big part of it, like the insecurity that's deeply laid in there, and I think it's also a bit of self-preservation. Like, they're trying to prove that they are this thing, and if they don't have that sort of devotion, then how can they feel that for themselves? So I'm sure they're much more qualified to speak on this. If you guys have any ideas on that, send us an email at badideashow@gmail.com, because I'd love to read about it, especially if you've got a psychology background and have studied this a bit more. Like, I go medium level on cult stuff, but I do not have a degree in psychology to be able to like really make that assessment. Like most cults, the influx of money from the now possessionless cultists allowed them to rent many houses and stay on the road. These small group homes were used for devotees, while Applewhite and Nettles would live in their own separate places. They did loosen control a little bit in the 80s to allow contact with families on a limited basis, and they were allowed to like send cards for Mother's Day and things like that. They even allowed them to go to school so long as their education was about learning about coding computers and the like, because they believed that that would be a large part of their post-transcendent life.
Man, the logic that occasionally gets employed in these places is just... It's wild when it pops up, where you have all of this stuff that seems completely bonkers, and then you just drop in something completely sensible like, well, we're going to be on the alien mothership, we'll probably have a lot of computers up there, so let's everybody learn how to code.
Yeah.
And you're like, you've applied perfect logic to exactly the wrong problem.
I think that that's also a good way to get people doing something so like they actually have a little bit of self-empowerment there. And later they would use a lot of this coding ability to make money designing websites for that, and that's why their website still exists today. Which you really should go look at the Heaven's Gate website right now, both Al and the listeners, because heavensgate.com is very much still a thing.
Yep, it's super 90s.
It's so 90s. It's
I gotta
exactly
say,
what
I'm not so impressed with their coding ability looking at this website.
Yeah, but this was 1997.
Like, maybe, I guess. I think there were some better websites at the time. They hadn't developed the further HTML stuff, so a lot of it was just a text with a color.
Yeah, they don't even have real frames in this one. Like, frames were a way of making it look a little bit better in the 90s. Oh well. At this point, they would occasionally drive to deep parts of the desert, believing that it would be the night where the aliens would come to pick them up. These were sort of chosen at random, and I believe that Applewhite actually thought that these were going to be the nights where a ship was just going to take them away, but of course that never happened. Also, like, this was whenever Applewhite and Nettle decided to change their name from Bo and Peep to Doe and T. Not sure why.
Gotta keep it fresh, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of rebranding that happens in this cult. Like, they've gone through so many names already. In 1985, Nettles was slowly dying of cancer, which remained untreated. When she finally did pass, Applewhite claimed that it was because her had too much energy for this world, and that she had passed on and evolved to her next form. He did suffer a crisis of his own faith, and his followers helped him through it. He was going through severe doubts, and they actually put him back on the path. So I can't even imagine what it would be like to devote yourself to this guy who all of a sudden doesn't believe in his own stuff, and you have to convince him that he's like the champion of their cause.
I can kind of imagine it, but more importantly, that definitely locks you in, right? From a psychological commitment perspective, if you've been convinced to do the thing, that is one level. If you get to the place where you can convince somebody else who already knows all the stuff that the thing is correct, you're really... I was going to say drinking the Kool-Aid, but that's a different...
Eventually, Applewhite would say that Nettles was in constant communication with him, and that she would now be referred to as father, and from that point on, he used masculine pronouns when describing her ascended state. He also pressed harder on his people, demanding that his followers see him as Christ and act in full submission to him, to act as children or pets. He claimed that his first incarnation of Jesus was too soon, and people weren't ready to understand going up in a spaceship, and that's why they ended up killing him, and he basically had to stay in a state of limbo between body and body before he could get to the time when people were finally ready to hear his instruction. And this is part of the idea that the body was just a vehicle, and you hear this from the cult people that stayed out of the suicide. They still refer to their body as a vehicle. They still refer to it basically as a useless flesh sack for the soul. So it's interesting that even as recent as, like, I think the most recent interview I saw was like 2010, some people still believed in all this, and they were regretful that they weren't ones that got to go on the spaceship.
I can understand believing it. Some of the stuff that he's talking about, though, I mean, we talked about at the beginning, he seems like a guy for a lot of his life is just pretty normal.
Well, if you remember back to Georgia Southcott, like, she was normal until like 45, and then whenever she hit menopause is when she started her cult. I
guess that is possible, and it's scary, honestly, to think that your brain is that fallible. That everybody, you or anybody else walking around seeming to be a normal person, could go very, very wrong very, very quickly without any obvious explanation.
Yeah, I mean, I've considered starting a cult before, but we'll see how that goes eventually.
I'm not joining your cult, Tony.
We don't
I don't
need
believe
you,
that
Berg.
you're Jesus.
He also believed that Luciferians were aliens that tried to actively deny humanity's ascension. They were also the ones who tried to drive political correctness in culture.
Those two things.
Yes, those two things specifically. Because none of his predictions were coming true, membership dwindled. It got as low as 26 before they decided to rebrand to Total Overcomers Anonymous, and they would spend $30,000 to publish a full-page advertisement in the USA Today that warned of catastrophic judgment to befall the Earth. This actually was effective and got about 20-ish members to come back to full membership, as well as get some new blood in there.
It's so weird to be talking about this cult stuff and them being like, we bought an ad in the USA Today, let's see if that brings up membership. It's like, are you a UFO cult or are you selling iPhones? I cannot tell.
Why not both?
I guess.
In the early 1990s, Applewhite posted some of his teachings on the internet, but he was stung by the resulting criticism. That year, he first spoke of the possibility of suicide as a way to reach the next level. He explained that everything human had to be forsaken, including the human body, before one could ascend. This is whenever he decided to rename this once more into Heaven's Gate. It's amazing how many, I didn't even cover all the names that they chose for this. And it's like, over the course of 20-some years, he really just flopped around a lot, but he's settled on Heaven's Gate.
You mentioned 1988. I'm looking on their website here. They have a lot of 88 updates. That seems to be sort of the early stuff, including some cassette tapes that he apparently recorded.
Yeah, you could get the cassette tapes. You could get a bunch of, a lot of other things for introductions and trying to get, the new recruits, what you would send to people that weren't quite turned yet.
I bet the actual cassettes still exist somewhere, Tony. That'd be
Probably, yeah, but those would be worth a lot of money.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to have physically in your hands instead of just the transcript.
Yeah, the collectible I would want is a little bit more morbid, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The group increasingly focused on the suppression of sexual desire. Applewhite and 7 others opted for surgical castration. They initially had difficulty finding a willing surgeon, but eventually found one in Mexico. In Applewhite's view, sexuality was one of the most powerful forces that bound humans to their bodies and thus hindered their efforts to evolve to the next level. He thought that next-level beings had no reproductive organs, but that Luciferian beings had genders. He also cited the verse in the New Testament that said that there would not be marriage in heaven. In addition, he required members to adopt similar clothing, haircuts, and to reinforce that they were a non-sexual family. So just imagine an entire cult where they all had the same Spock haircut.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a cult.
Yeah.
I'm having flashbacks to a couple of movies you and I have both seen. The Endless and Resolution, which was the movie that preceded it, where there's this cult out in the weird wilderness where they're all wearing the same clothes, and they're not all in the same haircut in that one.
Yeah, but they definitely had very similar attitudes in the way they spoke to each other and everything. It was very, very much a unit. The group veered closer to doom, and each member recorded testimonial videos in which they detailed why they would be leaving their vehicles, and that suicide was transcendence, and that not killing yourself was the actual suicide. They even have a thing posted on their website that says they're against suicide, but because they were doing it to transcend, it doesn't count as suicide. Now, almost all of these videos that I watched seemed very sincere. The people seemed to be just excited and happy, and they were talking about how good it was going to be to actually be off of this awful dismal rock and all this, except for one girl that was just crying the whole time, and I felt pretty bad about hers.
Yeah, that sounds bad.
When the comet Hale-Bopp appeared, Applewhite took this as the sign that he'd been waiting for. This is where Nettles wanted them to end their lives because the comet had a little shadow behind it that science couldn't explain, and they determined that that was the spaceship for them to escape on. Each member who was dedicated to die got a black uniform and a patch that read Heaven's Gate Away Team, and that's the thing I was talking about. I kind of want one of those patches. I want to just frame it somewhere. I don't know why. I just want that in my house. But that was a reference to Star Trek. Whenever they've got people out on the ships, they call them the away team.
Yeah, the red shirts.
Yeah, basically.
Literally volunteering to be red shirts.
Yeah, and they were all in these black shrouds, and they all wore matching Nike shoes, which I'm sure Nike loved when this hit in 1997, I believe, when all this went down.
They're doing okay, Tony.
I'm sure.
That was the hit that maybe was going to sink them.
I mean, at least they know they're comfortable in the afterlife with those shoes.
I'm uncomfortable making jokes too much, but yeah, there's a lot of jokes that could be made here if it wasn't people who killed themselves.
Yeah. Applewhite would record a very enthusiastic farewell in which he cited their transcendence to higher beings as well as his own hatred for the Earth. After getting his followers into a mansion outside of San Diego, the 39 people would slowly kill themselves with barbiturates, applesauce, and vodka. And this one still baffles me. Like, I've never heard of a cult doing it over so many days. Like, where they actually just had to hang out with the bodies for a while, because it was 15 the first day, 15 the second day, and then 9 the last day. And Applewhite would be one of the last 4, in which his helpers aided in his death and then took their own lives. Those last 2 were the only ones that still had the bags over their head, because they put the bags over as well as, like, took the other things. And it's just a bizarre way of going out, but they were all put in their individual beds. And a guy named Rio D'Angelo, who was a former member, got a care package. I think it was the day after they had actually done this, and it was basically saying that they had done it, that they had completely like transcended this life. So he took a video camera over there and just wandered through the house taking video of the aftermath of this. And it's so eerie because there's no blood, there's nothing like that. It's just bunk beds filled with people.
That's sad.
Very disturbing, and it's also a big part of the movie that I think is going to be a very notorious one called The Lodge. Like, one of the victims had survived a thing like that, and it was a very, very powerful movie. But, thankfully, the group had purchased $10,000 insurance policies against being abducted by aliens for each member.
What? What?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know.
I thought that was their whole point. I said I was going to try to be respectful, but this is...
Believe me, I ran across that line, and I read it 3 times before it really stuck, and I didn't know where to put that. So I just threw it out there. But yes, they all took out insurance on not getting abducted by aliens.
This is just sad.
Yeah, it's very, very sad. That's why this is very much a bad idea. It's like, we always talk about with cults that the bad idea is ultimately following somebody who thinks that they know everything about, like, this life, about, like, following into, like, their form of mysticism, giving up all your possessions to be with these people. Like, it's pretty clear where the bad ideas are on this, but it's still absolutely baffling to me, like, how far people can go in these. And there's a reason why this cult only had, like, 70 members. I think it actually had a little over 100 at its peak, but it's just, like, what they believed in was so absurd that people just actively, like, couldn't understand anybody going into it. Like, Scientology at least keeps their really, really weird stuff veiled for a while, and it becomes, like, self-actualizing. The Jones cult started out as something where it was very much a good thing in Indianapolis as far as, like, the things that he was getting done for his people.
Yeah, it was appealing from the outside. You look at it and you're like, oh, those people seem nice. I wonder what they believe.
Yeah, but there just never seemed to be a very good benefit of being in this particular church, like, other than, like, maybe the camaraderie you would get and being able to talk about aliens all the time. But I just didn't see the appeal here, and I'm so glad that the appeal was limited, so it stopped it. But 39 people is still the second largest mass suicide since Jonestown of American citizens. It's absolutely insane.
And something that jumped out to me, you were talking about their idea of, you know, dying and transcending, and like that kind of idea metaphorically is in a lot of the way we talk about becoming better, right?
Yeah.
People understand that in some form there are things within us that have to die, that we have to turn away from to be able to do better, to become better. There's the idea in Christianity of, you know, baptism, of dying and being reborn, but it's not. These guys couldn't get there within themselves. They believed that they actually had to kill themselves to actualize that kind of thing. And to think that you're aiming so hard at becoming a better person and yet following the wrong path to your own destruction. Like, these people aren't trying to hurt anybody else, from what I can tell. Even this guy who's the leader here is not, like, cackling and thinking to himself, I've got these people in my grip. He follows them right off of the same cliff into, you know, whatever's beyond death. Probably not aliens, though. And
so far as we know.
You know, it
probably not an alien ship behind a Hale-Bopp.
Yes. And doesn't manage to actually get to the place where they wanted to be badly enough to kill themselves?
Hard for us to consider because we've never been drawn into something quite like that before. Like, I've talked with some members that were trying to, like, recruit people into a weird cult at a grocery store. I've told you about that a little bit before. But it's never, like, they tried it at my house even, too. But it's never been something where I was like, all right, I'm going to go to this meeting and see what it is. And then all of a sudden, like, fall deeper in because I'm needing something to fill a void in my life. And it always seems like they're going after people that have weaknesses, like former or current drug addicts or people that have been abused. Like, they always seem to find those types of people first and turn them into their adherents and send them out into the world. It's just a strange thing. I get, like, weirdly into this sort of stuff. Al does not. Like, I just wonder about it from a psychology perspective, and cults have always fascinated me. So I'm sorry if I seemed a little bit lighthearted on this. It's definitely a horrid tragedy, but it's something that I think is worth studying.
You should not apologize for yourself unless you're doing something you know is the wrong thing, Tony. I didn't think you were doing anything inappropriate with the way you presented the material, so.
All right. If you did find a way to...
opinion about the lighthouse you had last week?
Objectively false.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Do a bad idea on ourselves.
Yeah, that's only 200 negative comments so far. But anyway, I hope you guys have an excellent week. We will come back at you with more bad ideas. If you really enjoyed this, check out patreon.com/badideas. You can get access to our other podcast, as well as a bunch of awesome content, stickers, pins, etc. We will talk to you guys later.
Bye, guys.